A torrent of afternoon shoppers flowed through the polished marble halls of the Viridian Plaza, a temple of high fashion and empty wallets. At its center sat 10-year-old Lily, a small island of resilience in her wheelchair, a basket of vibrant, hand-picked daisies on her lap. But Marco Vance, a security guard whose uniform was 2 sizes too tight for his ego, saw her only as a stain on the mall's perfect image. He strode over, and after a cruel word, swiped the basket, sending the flowers scattering. But then, a cold, quiet voice cut through the air. Before I tell you who that voice belonged to, and the storm that was about to break, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. It all started on a deceptively bright Tuesday afternoon, under the mall's unforgiving fluorescent lights. The Viridian Plaza wasn't just a mall, it was a statement. Sunlight streamed through a massive glass atrium, glinting off designer logos and the curated smiles of the wealthy. In this world of sterile perfection, Lily was a beautiful, defiant anomaly. Orphaned and left with a condition that bound her to a wheelchair, she lived with a man she knew only as her grandpa, a quiet, gruff man with a shaved head and eyes that saw everything. Selling flowers wasn't begging. It was her work, a way to contribute, to bring a small splash of natural color into this artificial world. Each daisy sold was a small victory against the hand life had dealt her. Marco Vance, on the other hand, saw life as a hierarchy, and at 35, he was furious he wasn't higher up the ladder. Failing to become a cop had soured him, leaving a bitter residue of resentment that he polished daily with his petty authority. He patrolled the mall not as a protector, but as a king surveying a kingdom he despised. And in his kingdom, Lily was a weed. He'd warned her before, his words slick with contempt. This isn't a flea market, he'd sneered a week ago. People come here to spend thousands, not to be guilt by a kid. Today, his patience had evaporated. He saw a wealthy couple glance at Lily with sympathy before entering a boutique, and for Marco, that was the final straw. He marched toward her, his boots echoing with self-importance. "I told you to leave," he hissed, his voice low enough to avoid widespread attention. Lily looked up, her expression more confused than scared. "But people like my flowers." "They don't like you," he retorted, the cruelty landing with precision. Before she could respond, he acted. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the basket of daisies flying. White and yellow petals rained down on the cold marble, a vibrant funeral for her afternoon's work. A collective gasp rippled through the nearest shoppers. But Lily, tears welling in her eyes, did something Marco didn't expect. She found her voice. "You can't do that," she said, trembling but firm. "It's wrong." That small act of defiance was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. To be challenged by this nobody? Marco's face purpled with rage. He lunged forward, grabbing her small shoulders. "Wrong," he snarled, shaking her violently. Her head snapped back against the hard metal frame of her wheelchair. A sickening thud, barely audible over the mall's ambient music, marked the impact. Lily cried out, a sharp whimper of pain and shock. Across the atrium, inside a small coffee shop, a young barista's phone was already pointed in their direction. He had been watching the whole thing, his stomach churning. But he wasn't just filming a bully. He was filming because he recognized the quiet man sitting at a small table nearby. The one who looked like a simple, aging grandfather, but who had just stood up with the coiled stillness of a predator. The man was Jason Statham, and he was walking toward the storm. Jason Statham moved without a sound. The crowd, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, instinctively parted for him. He didn't run. He didn't shout. His presence alone was a physical force, a gravity well of controlled fury that bent the room around him. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes, fixed on Marco, were chips of ice. He came to a stop just a few feet away, his shadow falling over the scattered daisies and the terrified little girl in the wheelchair. Marco, blinded by his power trip, saw only an old man in a flat cap who had no business interfering. "Move along, Grandpa," he barked, puffing out his chest. "This is official mall business." The kid was soliciting. Statham didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely on Lily, checking her for any visible injury. He saw the red mark forming on her temple where her head had hit the frame. He saw the terror in her eyes. And in that moment, the fate of Marco Vance was sealed. "Are you deaf?" Marco snapped, taking a step forward. "I said get out of here." Statham slowly raised his gaze from Lily to Marco. The sheer unadulterated coldness in that look made Marco's bravado falter for the first time. "That's my daughter," Statham said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floor. Marco let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Your daughter? Yeah, right. Now if you don't." He was cut short by a panicked voice calling his name. "Vance, stand down. Right now." Mr. Harrison, the mall manager, came scurrying through the crowd, his face ashen. He was a man who prided himself on control, on maintaining the placid, expensive atmosphere of the Viridian Plaza. But right now, he was sweating through his tailored suit. A decade ago, his security consulting firm had been hired to upgrade the personal protection for a handful of A-list celebrities. One of them had been Jason Statham. Harrison had never forgotten the man's intensity, his professionalism, or the implicit warning in his handshake. And now, that same man was standing in the middle of his mall, looking at one of his guards as if he were a piece of garbage to be disposed of. "Mr. Statham," Harrison stammered, his voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "You still don't," Statham replied, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He never took his eyes off Marco. Marco was frozen, his mind struggling to process the scene. Statham? The mall manager was calling this old guy Mr. Statham? The movie star? His brain finally caught up, and a wave of ice-cold dread washed over him. He looked from the terrified face of his boss to the stony expression of the man he'd just insulted, and then to the girl in the wheelchair. "Vance, your badge and your radio." "Now," Harrison commanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "You're suspended. No, you're fired. Get out." Marco, pale and trembling, fumbled to unclip his badge. His reign was over. The power he had wielded with such glee had vanished in an instant. But Statham hadn't moved. He watched Marco's humiliation without a flicker of satisfaction. This wasn't enough. It wasn't even a start. As Marco turned to slink away through the watching crowd, Statham reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple, black business card. He handed it to the mortified mall manager. "This is my attorney's number," Statham said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than any shout. "She will be in contact. This is not over." The barista's video hit the internet like a lightning strike. It was raw, shaky, and utterly damning. Within an hour, it had 1 million views. By morning, it was on every major news network in the country. The title was always some variation of the same shocking theme. Arrogant guard attacks disabled child at luxury mall. The hashtag Justice for Lily exploded, trending #1 worldwide. The footage was inescapable. The scattered daisies, Marco's snarling face, the sickening thud of Lily's head hitting her wheelchair, and then the slow, deliberate arrival of Jason Statham. He became the silent avenger, the protective father every person wished they had in their corner. His stoic fury resonated more powerfully than any screaming match could have. He didn't give interviews or appear on talk shows. Instead, a single, powerful statement was released through his attorney. It read, "What happened to my daughter was an unforgivable act of cowardice. But this is no longer about one girl. It is about every person who has ever been made to feel small, helpless, and invisible by someone abusing a sliver of power. We will seek justice not just for Lily, but for all of them." The statement was a call to arms. Statham's legal team filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Viridian Plaza and its parent security corporation, citing negligence, assault, and emotional distress. And then they did something unprecedented. They publicly opened the lawsuit to include testimony from any other individuals who had been victimized by Marco Vance. The floodgates opened. A janitor came forward, describing how Marco had once intentionally kicked over his bucket of dirty water and made him clean it up on his hands and knees while laughing. a young street artist testified that Marco had confiscated and destroyed his portfolio for loitering. An elderly woman who ran a small candy kiosk spoke of his constant verbal abuse and threats. A clear, damning pattern of a serial abuser emerged, a man who preyed on those he knew couldn't or wouldn't fight back. Each news story added fuel to the fire of public outrage. The Viridian Plaza's brand, once synonymous with luxury, was now linked to cruelty and abuse. Mr. Harrison, attempting to quell the PR nightmare, held a press conference. He stood at a podium, looking haggard, and delivered a carefully worded apology about an isolated incident and a failure to meet our own high standards. But the public saw it for what it was, a desperate, hollow attempt at damage control. The cameras weren't interested in his excuses. They, and the world, wanted real accountability. The narrative was no longer in the mall's control. It belonged to Lily and to the quiet, formidable man who had stepped out of the shadows to defend her. The wave of opinion had become a tsunami, and it was about to crash down on them all. While the world was screaming for retribution online, Jason Statham was moving with quiet purpose. He didn't want a media circus. He wanted to build something permanent from the ashes of that ugly afternoon. He bypassed the talk show circuit and instead organized a town hall meeting at a local community center. There were no bodyguards, no flashy presentations. It was just him, a microphone, and a room packed with hundreds of local residents, supporters, and journalists. He stood before them, not as a movie star, but as a father. "Anger is a tool," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You can use it to break things, or you can use it to build things. Today, we start building." He then announced the formation of the Lily Foundation, an organization funded entirely by the initial settlement offered by the mall's terrified parent company. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid, financial support, and advocacy for disabled children and their families who face discrimination and abuse. It was a promise that no other child would have to face a bully like Marco alone. The announcement was met with a standing ovation. The focus shifted from revenge to restoration. But the legal battle wasn't over. Fueled by the testimony of other victims and immense public pressure, the district attorney's office filed criminal charges against Marco Vance: assault on a minor, battery, and violation of civil rights. His life was in free fall. Fired, shamed, and now, facing prison time, the man who had built his identity on intimidating the weak was now utterly powerless. The final courtroom scene was brief but potent. Lily, accompanied by Statham, gave her testimony. She didn't need to cry or raise her voice. She simply told the truth, her small voice filling the silent room. "He was mad because I wouldn't leave," she said, looking at the jury. "He broke my flowers, and then he hurt me. I was scared, but I knew my grandpa would find me." When the judge delivered the verdict, guilty on all counts, a wave of relief washed through the courtroom. Marco Vance was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a term extended due to the victim's vulnerability. Justice, formal and final, had been served. The story, however, didn't end there. The true epilogue took place 3 months later, not in a courthouse, but in a newly opened public space, the Lily Garden. Built beside the community center with funds from the lawsuit, it was a beautiful, fully accessible garden designed for children with disabilities. On its opening day, Lily was at the center of it all. She was no longer selling flowers. She was teaching another child in a wheelchair how to plant one. Statham stood a short distance away, watching her, a rare, genuine smile on his face. He hadn't just won a fight. He had planted a garden where something beautiful could grow. That one moment in the mall wasn't just about a bully getting what he deserved. It was a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by how you dominate the weak, but by how you choose to defend them. It showed that one person's quiet courage, whether it's a little girl saying, "That's wrong," or a father simply showing up, can be enough to topple an empire of arrogance and change a community forever. Have you ever witnessed someone abusing their small amount of power and felt helpless to stop it? What would you have done if you were in that mall, watching the scene unfold before Statham arrived? Do you believe that a single viral video can actually create lasting, meaningful change, or does the outrage just fade away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective. If this story reminded you that there are still heroes in this world, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and the quiet power of standing up for what's right. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the face of ugliness, goodness can and does win. We read and value every single comment. More incredible stories about everyday people doing extraordinary things are waiting for you on your screen. Click on one of those next, and we'll see you in the next video with another story that will restore your faith in humanity.